Hello everybody and happy Halloween. We are less than a week away from the spookiest day of the year, and every year around this time I like to do a ranking video, and they've usually been around a particular horror franchise, but this year I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different, maybe a little bit more ambitious, and so I decided to do my first ever tier list here on the channel. So it's still ranking, but we're not going to go from one all the way to the end. We're going to put them in different buckets, in different tiers. And to do that, I think you need a big enough group of movies. So I decided to combine my enjoyment of spooky movies around Halloween season with my love for the box office, which you see here on this channel all the time, and do a tier list of the most successful movies of all time when it comes to box office grosses. And as always, when you do a tier list, you have to set very clear criteria for what movies are eligible and what movies aren't. So first of all, when we talk about box office, a lot of you may say, well, are you talking about adjusted for inflation or unadjusted for inflation? And the answer to that question is yes. What I decided to do was set certain thresholds for box office earnings, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation, that would give me a good group of movies to choose from, a good mix from both lists. And I think that's what we have here. I'll mention as we go which movies are on which lists. And then the next question is always, well, what counts as a horror movie? It's very subjective, and for me to make that determination, I had to turn to exterior sources. So I did what I've done in the past when there are genre questions, which is that I have 4 different sources: IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, and Letterboxd. If 3 out of those 4 sites listed a film as a horror film, then it was eligible for the list, but it was ineligible if it fell below that 3-site threshold. And there were some movies like The Sixth Sense and Signs, just to name 2 from M. Night Shyamalan, that I would personally categorize as horror films that were not eligible for this list. And as we'll see, there are also some movies that are on this list that I personally would not categorize as horror, but that's just the way it goes. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into it. And I've tried to group these together in some ways that make sense, and sometimes you're just going to go kind of randomly from one movie to another. But let's start with the obvious one, and it does count as a horror movie according to my metrics, and that is the movie that's on the poster behind me, that is on the sweatshirt that I'm wearing, that is my favorite movie of all time, and that is Jaws. But I'm also judging this list not just on how good a movie is, but on how good of a horror movie it is. And that was the main question I asked myself. I know that I love the movie, but is it a top tier horror film? And I was at a certain point going to downgrade it from the top tier, which is the S tier, down to the A tier, which is still a very solid movie, but maybe not an all-time great horror film. But the more I thought about it, the more I said, well, wait a minute. What is the objective of a horror film? It's to scare you. And even though it may not have as many of the traditional horror elements as a lot of the other films on this list, I think that Jaws has scared arguably as many or more people than any other movie ever. When you talk about going to the beach and getting in the water, and so when we place it on this list, I mean, Jaws is my favorite movie of all time, but I believe that it is also an S tier horror film. Let's stay inside the Jaws franchise. The original Jaws is one of the top grossing horror films, both unadjusted and adjusted for inflation. Jaws 2 is one of the top grossing horror films of all time when you look at the adjusted for inflation list. And I actually don't hate this movie. I had a very famous movie fight with Kevin Smith over Jaws 2. And it's not that I think it's a terrible movie. I just don't necessarily like what it represents in the movie industry and what it helped to lead to as far as sequels that were inferior versions of the original. And that's what I think Jaws 2 is. It's not a terrible movie. It's got some solid scares. It's got one of the most disturbing deaths in the franchise when one of the teenagers gets eaten trying to climb back onto a boat. And so it's not going to go all the way down to the bottom tier, which is the D tier. We have S tier, which is the top A, B, C, and D tier. But I am putting Jaws 2 on the C tier only because I think when we get to the end of the list, and when I got to the end of the list, when I looked at the other movies that were on the B tier, which is the tier right above C tier, I just didn't think that Jaws 2 was quite good enough to match that level. So it is a C tier movie for me, but not because I hate it, just because I don't think that it is worthy of the company that it would keep if I put it up on the B tier.
That's a shark. And I know what a shark looks like because I've seen one up close.
All right, let's look at some films that are on this list that are from recent franchises. And we're going to start with the first Conjuring movie, The Conjuring, which is on the unadjusted for inflation list of top grossing horror films of all time. I think that it really helped to set the tone for horror movies for the last decade, really. And, you know, I think it's pretty obvious from reporting and everything else that Ed and Lorraine Warren were probably full of crap. But as characters, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga do a very good job of playing Ed and Lorraine Warren and making them people that we care about in the movie and across other Conjuring films. So I'm not going to hold the sins of the people that this movie is based on against the movie itself. And the first Conjuring, I think, is a solid haunted house story. It's got some really good scares. I don't love the ending of the film. I think it gets a little bit derivative of every demon possession movie that we've seen since the release of another movie that's on this list that we'll talk about later. So that kept it really out of the top tier. It wasn't in contention to be an S tier movie for me. I was close to putting it in the A tier, but ultimately I decided to go with the B tier, but it would be like in the high B tier.
Wanna play hide and clap?
Let's go now to the last entry that we just had in this franchise. It just came out earlier this year, The Conjuring Last Rites, which is one of the top grossing horror movies of all time if you don't adjust for inflation. And I think if you watch these movies back to back, you can really see the de-evolution of a franchise as it goes along. I'd say the first 3/4 of The Conjuring Last Rites isn't terrible. It's not great. It doesn't match how the franchise started, but it's not terrible. But the ending is really bad. It is goofy. It's not bad in the same way that the ending of The Conjuring is, where it's just derivative. I think it's just a bad ending for any movie, but especially when you're talking about what's supposed to be the last movie in a franchise. And honestly, having an okay beginning and a bad ending is a recurring theme, or will be a recurring theme on this list. So when I'm looking at where to rank it, I mean, I don't think it's atrocious. It's not the worst movie on this list. But again, much like when I was talking about earlier with Jaws 2, not quite being able to stand up with the other movies on the B tier, when I looked at The Conjuring Last Rites and the movies that made it to the C tier, I don't think it even raises up to that level. So The Conjuring Last Rites actually is the first movie that we're going to put on the very bottom down on the D tier. Let's move now to 3 movies from a current hit franchise. It's actually all 3 movies currently that exist in this franchise. It's the A Quiet Place franchise. So let's start with the first movie, A Quiet Place, which is a solid movie. And I actually think that all 3 movies in the franchise are pretty good. But the first one for me is clearly the best. It's a great premise. It's got solid execution. It's got really good performances. I love that John Krasinski came out doing something we'd never seen him do as a director before. And I think he really crushed it with the first Quiet Place movie. If we were talking about the best horror movies of the last 10 years, then I think A Quiet Place would be on the S tier, but I think it's a little bit too early to make that kind of determination. And at first glance, it doesn't automatically say, yes, I am one of the greatest horror movies of all time. And that S tier for me is reserved for movies that I can say absolutely are the best horror movies of all time. So I'm putting the first Quiet Place film on the A tier, solidly on the A tier, and we'll see. Maybe over time, history will determine that it's an S tier film, but it's an A tier film for me right now. So A Quiet Place is on the list of top grossing horror films of all time, both adjusted and not adjusted for inflation. Its sequel, A Quiet Place Part 2, is on the unadjusted for inflation list. And it's one of those movies that kind of holds a singular place in my memory just because of when it came out, because it was one of those movies that was delayed due to the coronavirus. And it was always a symbol of COVID for me because there was a big billboard for A Quiet Place Part 2 at the end of, I think it was Olive Avenue, as you were leaving Burbank, just kind of glowering over the 101 freeway. And it became, for me, a symbol of the lockdowns and everything because it was up there for months because Warner Brothers didn't have anything else to advertise. So I will always associate A Quiet Place Part 2 with that billboard and that long past release date that was still on the billboard. A lot of this movie is really good. I like the prologue showing the family on day one. The performances in the movie are solid. The kids in the film, Noah Jupe and Millicent Simmons, I think are especially good in the movie. Plus, we get Cillian Murphy and Jaimin Unsu added to the mix. I think you do have to overlook the fact that the kids aged rapidly in the 5 minutes that passed, or not even 5 minutes between the first movie and the second movie, but that's just the reality of making movies with kids. If you want to pick up right after the action, but there's been a gap in filming, they're gonna look older. I think the biggest flaw in A Quiet Place Part 2 is that it splits up its characters for too long. And so it just feels like a series of side stories that are stitched together. But I think it is still a pretty solid horror movie. It's not as good as the first film. I think that it's solidly a B-tier movie. And I have similar feelings about A Quiet Place Day One, which was maybe the last movie to qualify on the unadjusted for inflation list. I liked this movie about as much as I liked Part 2. I like the change in setting, the urban setting. So you have the same premise, but when you change the circumstances, you can make it feel a little bit fresh. Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn were good leads to kind of take over the franchise, and then you have Jaimin Unsu as sort of the overlap, and then he would go off to be in A Quiet Place Part 2. And this time there's a cat to root for, which always heightens the tension. I actually saw this movie at about the same time as I was preparing to be separated from my two cats. So this movie may or may not have prompted a bit of a breakdown for me in the parking lot of the movie theater after I saw it. Nothing to do with the movie, purely due to personal circumstances at the time. I think my biggest gripe with the film is that it had a couple of cheap scares that were almost below the quality of the rest of the movie. But I think it's a good movie, and because I have similar feelings about this and A Quiet Place Part 2, I think A Quiet Place Day One also goes on the B tier. I think that they are pretty equal, and I'm comfortable putting them there. Let's move now to a phenomenon that gripped Hollywood in the early to mid 2000s, and that is adaptations of Japanese horror films. And we will start with The Ring, which is one of the top grossing horror movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. It sort of led the way for American studio adaptations of Japanese horror movies. The iconography for this movie really, I think, transcends the movie itself. I remember seeing it, and when I saw it, 20 plus years ago, I had seen far fewer horror movies than I have now. I was much more sensitive to being scared and being frightened by this kind of thing. And I remember thinking even back then, oh, well, that wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. There are a few scenes that are really creepy, but The Ring is really almost more of a mystery than a horror film, and not a particularly well-written mystery. It has a chronic case of fourth act syndrome where the movie ends and then there's still 15 to 20 minutes left at the end of the film because they've got to have a twist and wrap things up. And the movie already kind of felt long by the time you get to that point. In rewatching it, it's actually kind of odd how much of a period piece it plays like now, with VHS tapes and old computers and newspaper journalists who are gainfully employed. Really, I would say that The Ring is influential. I would say that it is memorable, but I wouldn't say that it's a particularly great horror movie. So looking at my tier list, I am going to put The Ring on the C tier.
7 days.
Let's move now to another horror film that is one of the top grossing horror films of all time. If you adjust for inflation, it came out a couple years after The Ring, and that is the American remake of The Grudge. Now, I had not seen The Grudge before I did this list, and that's because, as I mentioned, I had seen far fewer horror movies when the original Grudge remake came out, and I was scared to death by the trailers for the film. I was scared by any of the clips after it came out that I ran across on YouTube. And so I had always assumed that this would be a horror movie that would really mess me up. And I enjoy, being slightly messed up by a horror movie, but I don't like one that's really gonna keep me up at night. So I avoided The Grudge like the plague for the last 21 years. And I was dreading watching it for this, but it qualified. No matter how many times I ran the numbers by the metrics I set up, The Grudge qualified. So I took a deep breath and I said, okay. And it was really kind of much ado about nothing. Now, maybe it's because I've seen a lot of horror movies since this one came out. The imagery associated with Japanese horror is a little bit more commonplace. It's been used in more movies. That might be part of it as well. But I actually think that a bigger part of it is it's just not a very good movie. There are a couple of really good, creepy scares, but I was mostly bored watching this movie, which I did not expect. I also don't think that it has a great ending. A great ending can paper over a lot of mistakes when it comes to horror films, but a bad ending only amplifies those mistakes. The thing that I thought was extra strange about The Grudge is that it's almost lost media at this point. It's very difficult to find on Blu-ray or physical media. It's not available to rent from any of the major services. It's not streaming on any of the major services. I was only able to see it with ads from the Pluto TV streaming service. So it's weird to look at a movie that I consider to be mainstream. I mean, it is, again, adjusted for inflation, one of the most successful horror films of all time, and yet it is nearly impossible to find, at least here in the United States. That's just how things work sometimes. It wasn't really a tough choice for me. The Grudge goes on the D tier, the bottom tier, because I just don't think it's a great movie or a great horror movie. Now, these next movies are what I call genre busters, in that I would not necessarily call any of these movies horror films, but I have to play by the rules that I set down, so they do qualify for this list. And the first movie is The Silence of the Lambs, which is a great movie. It is on both lists, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation, as one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time. I view this more as a thriller than a horror movie. I think that it does have some horror elements, but it works as a horror movie. I'm not angry that it's on this list.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Hannibal Lecter is a fantastic character with an iconic performance from Anthony Hopkins, and I like that Ted Levine's Buffalo Bill has kind of entered the zeitgeist a lot more over the years, because he's equally as great. He just kind of got overshadowed by Hannibal Lecter at the time. It's not necessarily the kind of horror that I would throw on at Halloween if I want to watch a scary movie, but it is a good movie, and it's definitely creepy. I love that final sequence of Clarice Starling in the dark when Buffalo Bill's after her. That is a great horror movie sequence. I would say that it is an S-tier movie, but judged as a horror movie, strictly as a horror movie, I would put Silence of the Lambs on the A tier with the asterisk that this is a downgrade, only because I'm ranking horror movies specifically and not ranking them based on overall quality.
Oh, and Senator, just one more thing.
Love your suit.
Now, this next movie is one that I absolutely do not think is a horror movie. It's on the adjusted for inflation list, but 3 out of the 4 sites, and maybe even all 4, listed it as horror, so it went on the list, and that is 1976's King Kong. No other King Kong movie qualified as horror, nor did any of the Godzilla films that may have been in contention for this list. I don't think that this movie is horror at all. I talked about this movie in my Godzilla Kong rankings last year. It's not a terrible film, but it's a bit of a snoozer. I think that the effects were maybe great at the time, but they don't necessarily hold up as well today. The relationship between King Kong and Jessica Lange is interesting. It's tough because D tier for me is reserved for terrible movies. So do I put it on the D tier because I don't necessarily think it belongs on the list, or do I put it 1 tier up because it's not a terrible movie? I guess I'm feeling a little bit generous. I'm gonna put King Kong on the C tier over my protest that I don't think this is a horror movie.
There's one place in Manhattan that looks exactly like a certain part of his native habitat. Let him through to it and you can trap him there. Let him climb to the top of the World Trade Center. Next
up is another movie that I just don't think is horror at all, and that is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I understand it's got horror in the title. I understand that it's got horror elements, but I would put it in about 3 different genres before I would say that it is a horror movie. It is on the list as one of the highest grossing horror films adjusted for inflation, but honestly, if people had been keeping track of the box office for Rocky Horror, every ticket sold over the last, 50 years, it would be on both lists. I'm sure this movie is a wonderful experience live. I've never been live, mainly because I've heard that first-timers are horribly humiliated at live screenings and life's too short. But I just don't think that this is a great movie. Tim Curry is incredible. There's so many movies out there that you can say, oh, well, the movie's not that great, but Tim Curry is amazing.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
But I think that what most people think of when they think of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, unless you're a hardcore fan, is stuff that happens in the first 20 to 30 minutes. The first 20 to 30 minutes of this movie is really solid. It's got the time warp and all of the, the introduction of Dr. Frankenfurter and Tim Curry and all that stuff. That's all good stuff. But after that first 30 minutes, I think the movie just kind of falls apart. It's a formless blob of stuff. The songs are not nearly as catchy. It picks up again toward the finale, but then it kind of drops off again at the end. I don't think that it's aged well in many respects over the last 50 years. So the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a movie, again, I acknowledge the legacy of it. I acknowledge that there are some people that do love it. I am not one of those people, and I just also don't think it's a horror movie. So when we look at this list again, Tim Curry alone really keeps this on the C tier. It would be hard for me to put him and his performance and say it's one of the worst horror movies of all time, but I can't put it any higher than the C tier because I just don't like it. What can I say?
It's not easy having a good time.
Next up is the one that I think is probably closest to being a pure horror movie on this list, and I get why people call it a horror film, and that's Gremlins. It's one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. Joe Dante, who would later go on to direct The Burbs, and Steven Spielberg really had fun on this movie. They teamed up for it, really. I'd call it a comedy more than anything, although it did really, really scare me when I was super young because my uncle showed it to me without my mom's permission. The first half of the movie is much more of a traditional horror film. The second half is like a zany adventure, and a pretty fun one at that. It's a really good time. The Jerry Goldsmith score is great, and the scene where Phoebe Cates talks about why she hates Christmas is worth the price of admission alone.
He was dressed in a Santa Claus suit. He'd been climbing down the chimney on Christmas Eve.
Fun fact about Gremlins, it was a massive hit back in 1984. It actually opened the same week as Ghostbusters, which did not qualify for this list because it was mostly listed as comedy and sci-fi / fantasy. And it's crazy to think that two stone cold classics both went against each other in the same weekend in the same summer. So looking at where I'm going to put it on the tier list, I mean, it's a crowd pleaser and it's still a really fun movie. It's pretty easy for me. Gremlins goes on the A tier.
Because you never can tell. There just might be a gremlin in your house.
Let's turn now to some 2025 releases. This group includes 3 films that came out this year, and the first one is one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation, and that is, of course, Sinners. I've reviewed this movie twice on the channel, one spoiler, one non-spoiler, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. I really like this movie. I think it is positioned very well to get a lot of awards attention. Some people dispute that it's a horror movie. I don't really see that. It is a drama, yes, but it's also a really great bloody vampire movie. When we talk about recency bias, this is like the king of it when it comes to this list because I am too close to this movie, and I think that society is too close to this movie right now to say, oh, it's definitely one of the greatest horror movies of all time. I think it could very well get up to that S tier very soon, but I can't put it there right now. It's just too recent, so it goes on the A tier with definite room to grow.
This wasn't no juke joint, no club. This here is a slaughterhouse.
Let's get to 2 movies that came out this summer. The first one is Final Destination Bloodlines, which is one of the highest grossing horror films if you do not adjust for inflation. I really enjoy this movie. I really enjoy Final Destination movies, and this is a really fun entry in the franchise. And really, it's as simple as that. You get some good kills, you get death working in creative ways. It's better overall than some of the movies in the franchise. I don't think it's as good as the best movies in the franchise, but it's pretty darn close. Again, just looking at the other movies that wound up in these different tiers, I can't put it up in the A tier, but I am very comfortable putting it in the B tier.
Life is precious. Enjoy every single second.
Finally, let's go to a movie that came out just a couple months ago, which is Weapons. It's one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time, unadjusted for inflation. I struggled a lot with this one because it's so new, and also because I really liked this movie, but I didn't love it as much as a lot of other people did. When it's great, but I do think that Zach Cregger bit off a little bit more than he could chew. with what he was trying to say with the film. I could see me appreciating this a little bit more on rewatch. I have not had a chance to rewatch it because there were several movies that are already on this list that I'd never seen that I had to make time to watch, or movies that I hadn't seen in years and years and years that I wanted to get a fair shake. So right now, I'm putting it on the B tier with the caveat that I think that this one has a lot of room to grow with more time and further rewatches on my part.
I thought it was something settlers got on the Oregon Trail.
All right, let's go to a movie that's just kind of floating out there. It doesn't really fall into any of the categories that I grouped the other movies into. It was a first-time watch for me, and that is 1953's House of Wax, which is one of the highest-grossing horror movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. And it's probably because it was not the first movie ever made in 3D, but definitely the one that kicked off the first wave of 3D movies in the 1950s. Vincent Price is a world-class wax statue artist who's also a murderer seeking revenge. And really, this is almost more of a gothic thriller. I mean, Vincent Price is a horror icon for a reason. I love his style, the way that he can deliver the most deliciously evil lines, basically twirling his mustache.
Sensation, horror, shock. Send them out in the streets to tell their friends how wonderful it is to be scared to death.
The movie also features an early role from Charles Bronson, who I did not recognize until I saw his name in the end credits. And one of my favorite things is to watch 3D movies in 2D because the cheesy effects look even worse. It's kind of charming. I think that House of Wax is a really fun movie, but I don't really think it holds up that well other than for camp and historical value. So looking at the list, I'm going to put House of Wax on B tier because I think it's got some solid scares. Again, it falls into a kind of its own genre. All right, let's get to two movies from the same director, and that is Jordan Peele. The first one is Get Out, which is one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. It's part of what you might call societal horror. It's almost its own genre that Jordan Peele has been spearheading over the last 10 years. I think this is a great movie that some might not categorize as horror, but it is very horrific when you think about it. And I think that you also have to engage with it on a deeper level, which I failed to do famously the first time I watched it. I didn't really get the movie. And then rewatching it and kind of digesting it a bit more, I came to appreciate it a lot more subsequent to that first watch. I think it's an incredibly well-made and incredibly well-acted film, one of the few horror movies that has ever had that awards breakout. It won the Academy Award for Jordan Peele's screenplay. It was nominated for Best Picture. It was nominated in the acting category for Daniel Kaluuya. Awards don't mean everything, but I love that it was able to break through in a way that very few horror movies have. I was tempted, I almost put it on the A tier for recency bias reasons, but it's been nearly a decade since Get Out came out. So, I think it's a great movie. I'm going to go S tier. I think it's one of the best horror movies of all time.
I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
Jordan Peele's second feature film, Us, is also one of the highest grossing horror movies of all time, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. And while I think that Get Out has grown in estimation over the years, it seems to me that people have kind of soured on Us a little bit since it came out, but I still really, really like the movie. Now, I think it's a bigger stretch than you have with Get Out. There are just some practicality things. The metaphor kind of overwhelms the reality of how any of this would work, but I think it has some great performances. Lupita Nyong'o should have been nominated for an Academy Award for this movie, but she was not.
Addie, don't do it. Maybe I should touch something off of you.
So it's not as great as Get Out. I don't think that it belongs up on the S tier, but Jordan Peele's great at creating atmosphere. There's a real atmosphere of dread around this movie. So Us, for me, goes on the A tier. I think that it's a really, really good horror movie and just a step above the middle of the pack.
Now, I thought I already done told y'all to get off my property, okay? So if y'all want to get crazy, we can get crazy.
Let's go now to a couple of movies in what is really the trademark franchise for Halloween, and that's because it's the Halloween franchise. And we will start with the original Halloween back in 1978. I have made a whole video on this channel a couple years ago about why I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's one of the first major horror films that I ever saw.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff. You can either ignore it or you can help me to stop it.
I watch it pretty much every year on Halloween. I think it's not just one of the best horror movies of all time. I think it is one of the best movies of all time. The cast, the score, John Carpenter's skill as a filmmaker, Deborah Hill's writing and producing, it all really comes together. It's often imitated. It's rarely duplicated. I'm not going to play games here. I think that Halloween 1978 is an easy entry on the S tier with the best of horror of all time.
You know, it's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Let's go now to a movie that came out, 40 years after that? It's 2018's Halloween, which is one of the top grossing horror films if you don't adjust for inflation. It was the second time, I think, that the franchise completely scrubbed the mythology that they'd built up and decided to do a legacy sequel with Laurie Strode encountering Michael Myers once again. There's a lot of hype around this one when it came out. I liked it less than a lot of people. I don't think that it's helped by the fact that subsequently its two sequels just absolutely biffed it. I think that Halloween Ends and Halloween Kills are both huge disappointments. I don't think this movie's a massive disappointment. It's just kind of a mixed bag. There is some great stuff in here. And honestly, I think if they had just not done the sequels and made this a standalone final showdown between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers, this had the potential to be something possibly that could stand up to the original Halloween, but they got franchise greedy and they undid the ending to this. It was sold as the final showdown, but then it's like, no, not really. We're going to do two more movies set on the same night, neither of which are very good. And so I think I have to give it a downgrade for that. And also the fact that it's just got some bizarre moments that were included.
Oh, man. I got peanut butter on my penis.
It just didn't all come together for me. So 2018's Halloween goes on the B tier. Not horrible, but not great.
I pray every night that he would escape.
What the hell do you do that for?
So I can kill him.
Well, it wouldn't be Halloween if we didn't tell some spooky ghost stories, so let's get to some ghost-centered movies, and we will start with 1982's Poltergeist, which is one of the highest-grossing horror films of all time, adjusted for inflation. I didn't see this movie until relatively recently, and by that I mean probably within the last 10 years, and I was shocked at how much I enjoyed it. I thought I really knew what it was just from the, pop culture osmosis of the major moments, but I think that it does a great classical haunted house story in a way that you could really make this movie in the exact same way, set in the 80s as like a retro movie, and I think it would be the exact same film.
They're here.
Lots of times when we talk about haunted house movies and horror movies in general, the ramp up is gradual, sometimes too gradual, and then the payoff doesn't pay it off enough and it just kind of falls flat. I think that Poltergeist is paced perfectly. It slowly tightens the screws, and then we release the tension at the end, and the end of this movie is just absolute madness. It's got that classic Spielbergian 1980s suburban dread. This is one of my go-to movies to watch every single Halloween. It's always a pleasure to watch. This goes on the S tier for me. I think that Poltergeist is one of the best horror movies of all time.
You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones!
Up next is Robert Zemeckis' What Lies Beneath, which is one of the highest grossing horror films, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. It's the movie that he made while he was waiting for Tom Hanks to lose the weight between the first and the second half of Castaway. I saw this in theaters when it came out, but I don't know if I'd seen it again before rewatching it for this video. And Robert Zemeckis clearly wanted to make this his Hitchcock movie with some very obvious references paired with Alan Silvestri's Bernard Herrmann score. This one definitely does a good job of reeling you in. It's that build-up that it does really well. Michelle Pfeiffer is good in this movie, and it's that kind of paranoia thing because a lot of this movie's subjective. We see things from her point of view, so we, the audience, think that there is definitely something going on in this house. It's haunted or something, but then we have to question the narrator. Is it an unreliable narrator? Is something going on with her, or is something supernatural actually going on?
I can't help but feel that somehow you're trying to sabotage me. You're trying to hurt me somehow.
Norman, this isn't about you.
Something is happening to me!
It really keeps you guessing right up until the point where it starts to unwind the mystery. And then I think that it starts to get a bit more standard. The third act doesn't really live up to the first two acts, but it's a really solid movie. And I think it's maybe one of those horror movies that people don't think of a lot, but I think really works. When I'm looking at where it goes, I mean, it's a great performance from Michelle Pfeiffer. It's got some great vibes. It was close to the A tier for me, but ultimately I settled on a very high B tier for What Lies Beneath.
I think she's starting to suspect something. Your wife.
Next up is the original 1979 version of the Amityville Horror, which is one of the highest grossing horror films adjusted for inflation. I didn't see this one until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it's one of those movies where its reputation precedes it. You hear people talk all the time about the Amityville Horror. There'd been a remake and a lot of sequels, so I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a pretty solid horror movie. I mean, the legacy's got to be there for a reason, and I don't understand what the big deal about this movie is because I just don't think it's very good. This is a haunted house movie that does ramp up too gradually without too much of a payoff. It just kind of meanders along as James Brolin and Margot Kidder learn the consequences of willfully moving into a notorious murder house.
Dude, a guy kills his whole family? Doesn't that bother you?
Well, yeah, sure, but houses don't have memories.
Maybe the whole based on a true story thing made it more high profile when it came out in the late 1970s, but I think that there have been many holes that have been poked in that supposedly true story. And for me, this is a movie that's scary really more in individual moments and not even really that scary. I mean, the most effective scare is when a cat jumps at a window. So yeah, the Amityville Horror, great name recognition, but I got to put it on the C tier. I just was not that impressed with this film the first time and not impressed when I rewatched it for this list. Speaking of a film with a big legacy, let's get to one that's one of the highest grossing films of all time, adjusted and unadjusted for inflation, and one of the most notable films in that great movie year of 1999, The Blair Witch Project. Now, The Blair Witch Project is linked for all time with the next movie on this list, and I'll discuss why when I get to that film. But for a 16-year-old in 1999, this was part of a watershed year for movies, and experiencing it in real time is really something that it's hard to describe because the internet was still very new, and this was one of the first major movies, if not the first major movie, that was marketed heavily on the internet. So there was that question about, like, is it real, is it not? I didn't think it was real by the time I got to go see it, but it was a really intriguing buildup as the movie was heading to theaters. And it affected me a lot when I saw it because, again, found footage horror, which is basically its own genre, really didn't exist at that point. I'm sure that there had been movies that were done in a similar style, but the idea of selling everything as 100% real with those aesthetics, definitely for me at my age and for the audience at that time, was a new concept, and it brought horror to a very kind of visceral sort of life that nobody had really experienced before, or at least I hadn't experienced before. And so when I first saw it, I remember being very, very scared by it. I was super creeped out. And then I remember seeing it a second time, not in a theater, and thinking, yeah, no, this is still a super creepy movie, but maybe not as creepy as the first time that I saw it. And it's probably been, I don't know, 15 or 20 years since I saw The Blair Witch Project. And watching it back again with the hindsight of history and kind of trying to look at it a bit more objectively outside the moment, I think that it's still a pretty good movie. But it's a movie that I think has a longer legacy than it has a lasting impact as a horror film. I really just don't like any of the characters in this film. The bulk of the movie is them walking around the forest, yelling at each other, yelling into the woods.
Let's go, we gotta find him.
And then every once in a while, something kind of creepy or spooky happens. I get that that was meant to kind of sell the reality, but it really is kind of taxing after a while.
I gave you back the map, Heather.
I gave you the map.
I gave you back the map.
And add that to the fact that now, as an older viewer, when I look at the documentary, the pieces of the documentary that they were making, I think it would have been a terrible documentary, too. It just was not very well done.
It is a small, quiet Maryland town. Much like a small, quiet town anywhere.
Even if they'd gotten out of that forest, the Blair Witch Project was a doomed enterprise from the beginning. It does have effective moments, and I can see why I responded so strongly at first. I think it's essential when it comes to the history of horror films. If we were talking about most influential horror films of all time, The Blair Witch Project would absolutely be in the top tier, but as a movie on its own, I don't think it holds together that well, so I am putting it on the B tier.
I am so sorry for everything that has happened.
Let's move now to a movie that is forever linked to the Blair Witch Project for me, and it's a movie that is one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, adjusted for inflation, and that is The Haunting, which came out in the same summer of 1999. And the reason it's so closely linked to Blair Witch Project is that the theater that was playing the Blair Witch Project was famously lax when it came to carding people when they were buying tickets for movies. I was 16, so I was too young, technically, to go see the Blair Witch Project without a parent or guardian. So my friends and I decided we were going to go try to see the movie in the middle of the day on a weekday in the summer, and they sold us the ticket. So we were like, yeah, all right, we made it. So we went in, we bought our soda, we got our popcorn, we went up, and the ticket taker carded us and turned us away at the door. And so there were two movie theaters in my town. There was the one playing the Blair Witch Project, and then there was the one right down the street that was playing about 30 minutes later, The Haunting. So we said, well, we want to go see a movie. We may as well go see this one. It's rated PG-13. We can go see it. And I didn't like it in 1999. I don't know if I've seen it since it came out, but rewatching it again for this video, I still didn't like it. CGI in movies was still fairly new, and I guess I could see what they were going for, but the effects in this film are atrocious. I don't think that the performances are very good. Lily Taylor's a good actress, but she is terrible in this movie.
Carolyn was my great-great-grandmother, and the children are my family.
The tone is all over the place. There's just really nothing to enjoy, for me to enjoy in The Haunting. I think I liked it even less on rewatching it. So The Haunting, for me, completely separate from the fact that it was my backup to the Blair Witch Project, easily a D tier movie. Just not very good.
Wow, you're so dominant.
Thanks.
Next up are two more movies that are from the same franchise, and both of them are among the highest grossing horror movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. And we will start with maybe the definitive horror movie for my generation, for us millennials, maybe for Gen X, and maybe for Gen Z as well. I'm talking about 1996's Scream. The original Scream was the horror movie and franchise of my high school and college years, and I think that the first Scream still holds up. Even though some of the cultural references may have faded a little bit, the tone is still there, the characters are still there.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
It completely reinvented the slasher genre and modernized it for a then contemporary audience. It was the official kickoff of the second generation of slasher movies. The opening with Drew Barrymore works as an incredible horror short film on its own.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
I've seen it as many times as I have seen any other horror film, and I enjoyed it every time. As an elder millennial, this movie holds a very special place in my heart, but I think even removing it from my generational love, it's still a really good movie, and it's chugging along. I mean, we still got a franchise that's pumping out sequels, that people are enjoying it, and I think that the original Scream still gets a lot of play every year around Halloween. So for me, Scream 1996 is an S-tier movie.
I'm getting another beer. You want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
Let's get to the sequel, which came out a year later, Scream 2, which is not a terrible sequel. It's a lesser version of the original, but it doesn't lose a lot of the charm or a lot of the edge, the self-referential nature of the first movie. I just think it gets a little bit lost in the woods plot-wise, but there are some great set pieces, including another great opening sequence with Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps, and the meta Scream movie inside of the movie, Stab. Scream 2 is pretty clever in how it deals with the events in the first film and how it addresses sequels, in that the events happening in the movie are a sequel to the events in the first film, but we're also watching an actual sequel. You could really get kind of lost up your own butthole with that kind of thing, but they navigated it pretty well. Good job on Kevin Williamson's part there. And I think you also have a great returning cast alongside new faces like Timothy Olyphant and Laurie Metcalf. If anything, it does sometimes become the sort of generic slasher film that the first movie was satirizing, but it kind of makes up for that because it is a good mystery in addition to being a good horror film. And I think that The original Scream is maybe the best horror movie of the bunch, but this one might be one of the best mysteries, or at least have the best resolution to the mystery of any of the Scream films. So overall, it's a good movie, if not a great movie. I think it's solidly B tier, and you could probably talk me into putting it on the A tier. Even looking at it now, I'm like, should it go up there? I'll leave it where it is, but when you look at the B tier, it's like the top of the B tier.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Showgirls. Absolutely frightening.
All right, let's move on now to a couple of movies featuring demons, and we will start with the demon movie that every demon movie has tried to do for over 50 years now, The Exorcist, which was released in 1973, if you adjust for inflation. It's on both lists, but I think the adjusted gross is over $1 billion. The Exorcist left such a legacy in the horror genre that there are still a handful of movies that come out every year to this day trying to make it again, and most of them fail. I can't imagine how shocking this movie must have been for an audience that had never seen anything like this before. It is a harrowing study of innocence corrupted that takes its time to wind you up, but then does not let you off the hook for like an hour. And I mean, there's really no debating it. I think this is an easy S-tier movie.
Where's Reagan? In here. With us.
Let's go to a demon movie that came out just a few years after The Exorcist, and that is 1976's The Omen, which is one of the highest grossing horror films of all time adjusted for inflation. I think I'd only seen this movie once or twice before rewatching it for this video. I remembered enjoying it, but I didn't remember liking it as much as I did this time. I was surprised at how much I still enjoyed it. It is a bit more dated than some other 70s horror films, but I think it still works. Gregory Peck and Lee Remick are great as two parents who slowly realize that their adopted son Damien may literally be the devil. Jerry Goldsmith's score in this movie is one of the greatest horror scores ever composed. Jerry Goldsmith did a lot of great horror movie scores. And the kid that they cast, Harvey Spencer Stevens, just the perfect creepy kid. I think a lot of people might choose Rosemary's Baby as their favorite possessed kid movie, but it's The Omen for me. And, you know, this is a subjective list. I'm not trying to rank the movies as far as where society would put them. I'm ranking them as far as where I would put them. And surprisingly, I thought it would be high up on the list. I'm putting The Omen up on the S tier.
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
All right, we've done ghosts and we've done demons. Now let's do some vampires. These are a couple of other vampire movies besides Sinners that are on the list. The first one is Interview with the Vampire, which is one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, adjusted for inflation. Pre-release, this film was best known for Anne Rice totally trashing the casting of Tom Cruise as Lestat, something that she reversed course on when she actually saw the movie. So Anne Rice was kind of one of the proto-internet trolls. Tom Cruise is actually really good in Interview with the Vampire, and that's one of the biggest problems for me with the movie is that he's so good that the first half I think is way better.
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we.
I think that the second half meanders a little bit more as you're following a depressed Brad Pitt around the globe. Really what saves the second half, or a lot of it, is Kirsten Dunst, because she is great in the movie. What a great young performance, supporting performance.
You give her to me, Louie! Do this before you leave me!
I would say that Interview with the Vampire is a really enjoyable film. If it had been able to sustain what it did in the first half, I think it'd easily be an A-tier film. I'm putting it on the B tier, but I think that it's bordering on A tier. It's very, very close.
Claudia, what have we told you?
Never in the house.
Let's go on to another vampire movie that I think has been reevaluated as time has gone on, and that is Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. I did not see this movie for the first time until a few years ago, so the most that I knew about it is that Keanu Reeves is terrible in it, but in that very endearing and earnest Keanu Reeves way.
I know where the bastard sleeps. I brought him there. To Carfax Abbey.
But this is actually a pretty strong movie, and a lot of it comes down to Gary Oldman. Gary Oldman, you can tell, at least it seems like, loves playing Dracula.
They say you are a man of good taste.
He is doing so much. He hits just about every note that you can as an actor, from heavy drama to high camp, and he hits all of them. I mean, I think he was an inspired choice for this role. I also like Anthony Hopkins, who is equally unhinged as Van Helsing. He's having a blast.
Was she in great pain?
Yeah, she was in great pain. Then we cut off her head and drove a stake to her heart and burned it, and then she found peace.
Doctor!
And I think that this may go down as the last great film that Francis Ford Coppola ever made. I mean, what else are you going to put up there? Jack? It's not Megalopolis. He may think that it's Megalopolis, but I don't think that it's Megalopolis. I think that this has really, really held up well over the years. It's definitely not perfect, but I kind of love it for its imperfections because it just seems to embrace everything. It has kind of an openness about it. It's a borderline movie when it comes to where I'm putting it as far as the tiers. I'm tempted to put it on the B tier, but I think it just barely ekes into the A tier. I'm going to go with A tier, especially when we're talking about horror movies to watch around Halloween. This movie is a vibe, and I was vibing with this, rewatching it for this video. So yeah, you know what? I'm going A tier.
Count Dracula.
Dracula.
Speaking of a movie that's a vibe, let's go to one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, adjusted for inflation, and that is Sleepy Hollow, which is Tim Burton distilled and injected into your eyeballs. God, the style of this movie is great. Johnny Depp makes a good Ichabod Crane. He's hopelessly out of his depth. Yes, it can be a bit silly. It can be a lot silly, but it is so much fun to watch. Is it one of the best horror movies of all time? No. But is it one of the essentials for me every single Halloween? I would wager that I've watched it just about every year around Halloween. I think it's the perfect movie to either watch first or last on your Halloween list. It sets the mood. It's a lot of fun. I'm putting it on the B tier, but just barely. I understand why so many people count this as one of their favorite Halloween horror movies.
There is no horseman. There never was a horseman. There never will be a horseman.
All right, let's talk about another movie that's a bit of a genre hopper. It's on the list of most successful movies, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. And it's not just a genre hopper because we're trying to decide whether it's a horror movie or not a horror movie. It's also a genre hopper because people try to decide if it's a vampire movie or a zombie movie or neither. And I'm talking about I Am Legend. The first 2/3 of this movie is great. Will Smith surviving in a deserted, plague-infected, post-apocalyptic New York City. He's great. The deserted city is great. It delivers on the premise. But infamously with this movie, it doesn't just kind of fall apart at the end like some of these movies. It completely falls apart at the end to the point where it feels like all the great work done in those first 2 acts is wasted. Part of it is that the special effects, even though they were done in the mid to late 2000s, are just almost laughably bad. And so the main creatures in the movie aren't scary. They're cartoon characters, and that robs the third act of all of its power, along with all of the choices that are made in the plot. I mean, this movie really kind of falls into 2 distinct areas: the part before the sad thing happens and the part after the sad thing happens. I'm not going to say what the sad thing is, but I will say that if you've seen I Am Legend, you absolutely know what I am talking about. If this movie had stuck the landing, then I think it would have been A tier. If this movie had kind of fumbled the landing, then I think it'd be B tier. But it totally falls off the diving board. It doesn't even attempt to dive. It falls off and hits its face on the way down. So I Am Legend, I got to put on the C tier. As much as I love the first 2/3, it's just the ending of this movie is horrific.
Please say hello to me.
Let's go to another kind of uneven movie that had some trouble with the ending. It had a reshot ending. It's one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation, and that is World War Z. It's a movie similar to I Am Legend in that it's got a promising opening, a well-realized sequence where a major city falls victim to a virus. It's got some good set pieces, and then an ending that nobody could really figure out what to do with that was reshot. Now, I do think that World War Z gets further into the movie before things get a little shaky, and I don't think that the ending is as bad in World War Z as it is in I Am Legend. I think that overall World War Z is a better movie, but it could have been a great movie. I still think one of the great all-time unrealized horror projects out there is to do some sort of streaming limited series adapting the book World War Z That would be so good. This movie is not that at all, but it has some great scenes. It doesn't completely fumble the ending. So looking at the tier list, it's got enough to go over I Am Legend, definitely. So I've got to put it up in the B tier, but I can't put it up really higher than that.
We intercepted a communique from an Indian general saying they were fighting the Rakshasa. Translation, zombies.
All right, we're approaching the end, so let's plow through some more recent releases. They weren't released this year, but they were released in the last few years. The first one is Split. It's one of the highest grossing films, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. This is another movie that I wouldn't necessarily put in the horror genre. I don't think it's horror first, but it's horror adjacent. It doesn't stick out as some of the other ones. It's just interesting to me that Signs and The Sixth Sense, I would easily say are horror films. They don't count. This one I'm more on the fence about. It does count. Having said that, this movie works for two reasons, and those two reasons are James and McAvoy. He's brilliant in this movie with all the different personalities. Should have been nominated for an Oscar, but that's just not how things work when it comes to the Academy Awards. Even if this movie's not horror, I think it's still a pretty effective thriller, and it's one of the least weird of M. Night Shyamalan's films. I think having it be a stealth sequel to Unbreakable is really just the icing on the cake for me. I think it'd still be just as great if they had decided not to tie it to Unbreakable and had it be standalone. And really, McAvoy's performance alone, it's worth a whole extra tier. So while the movie without him, I think, would be solidly B tier, I think McAvoy takes this one up to A tier through sheer force of will.
I can't stay alive for too long or he'll know and get angry, etc.
Next up is a movie, again, I wouldn't necessarily call horror, but I guess if Jaws is a horror film, then this one would be a horror film too. It's one of the top ones, unadjusted for inflation, and that's The Meg. Listen, I like shark movies. I like goofy Jason Statham action movies, so this one really seemed like it could have been a potential home run. Unfortunately, they play this premise way too seriously. I mean, there is no reason why every single person in this cast should not be having the time of their lives. I think Rainn Wilson is the only one that really seems to know what movie he's in. Everything is just played stone cold serious, and that is death to a movie like this. If you're going to take the goofy out of a goofy giant shark movie, then you pretty much have to make Jaws, and they didn't do that. So I think that The Meg had potential, but for me, yeah, it goes on the D tier.
It's a shark.
It's like 25 meters.
It's a megalodon.
Let's go now to a movie that has a sequel coming out in just a few weeks, and that is Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, I never played 1 second of the video games because I'm not a big fan of jump scares. The movie ended up going pretty heavy on franchise mythology and relatively light on animatronics jumping out of you in the dark. I think this is another one that had a lot of potential to be a really fun movie, or maybe a lot of potential to be a really scary movie, but I didn't really think it was either. It wasn't very fun, and it wasn't particularly scary. Maybe the upcoming sequels will course correct, but I didn't like Five Nights at Freddy's. So it goes with The Meg down on the D tier. Hopefully the next one will get better. All right, so there are 5 movies left on the list, and 4 of them are an original film and its sequel. And we will start with It, which came out in 2017. It is one of the highest grossing horror films of all time, both adjusted and unadjusted for inflation. This was a great target for a remake because I think that the original TV miniseries holds up again because of Tim Curry, much like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but it is very dated and I don't think it's that great. And there was so much potential to do a feature remake, which they did. And the thing that people forget is that when the original movie came out, I certainly didn't, and most of the audience didn't know that this was part 1 of 2. We really just thought that we were getting the kid part and they kind of spun it off into its own movie, which they did. But then, of course, they did the sequel afterwards. Bill Skarsgård birthed a modern horror icon with Pennywise. He's so good in this film. He's the perfect blend of cheeky, horrifying, and lethal. And really, It Chapter 1 has some solid scares in it. The kids are good in the movie. It's well cast. I don't really have a whole lot of complaints with It Chapter 1. It was a pleasure to watch the movie again. So I am putting it on the A tier. I just don't have many complaints. I think it's a really good film. Of course, following up with It Chapter 1 was It Chapter 2, Everybody going in said, well, hopefully they make some improvements because the adult portion of the book is the least compelling part of the story, and it turned out to be a less compelling movie, even though it was well cast, including James McAvoy, who I was just complimenting for his performance in Split. Bill Hader, I think, was really good in the movie because he also had the most fun part in the books. And I rewatched it, Chapter 2, for the first time in a while, putting together this list. It's good. I enjoyed it. It carries over a lot of what works from the first movie. You still get some stuff with the younger cast. Unlike Chapter 1, there was no avoiding the Stephen King weirdness in this movie, but I think they did their best. I would really just say that this one is a film that has sequences that work better than the movie overall. This one is just kind of wrapping up the story and giving us some good stuff along the way. It's a good resolution, but not a great movie. I'm putting it on the B tier. I think it's comfortably on the B tier, but I don't think it's really anywhere near as good as the first one.
Kiss me, fat boy.
Up next are a movie and its sequel that are almost two different genres. I think Roger Ebert called this movie one of the best haunted house movies of all time, and I agree with him, except it's not a haunted house, it's a spaceship, and it's not a ghost, it's a xenomorph. I'm talking about 1979's Alien, which is one of the top-grossing horror movies adjusted for inflation. This is more horror than sci-fi, I think, with Ellen Ripley as one of the best final girls of all time. It's one of those movies that makes you as scared as the main character is, and that comes down to Ridley Scott, the atmosphere, the creature design. I've never really had any question as far as what genre the original Alien is. I think it is squarely horror, body horror, psychological horror, that thing jumping out of you, the dark kind of horror, and it's great. It's a great horror movie that I think has every kind of horror that you could ask for. So Alien, for me, easily an S-tier horror film.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
One that's a little bit more difficult is the sequel, Aliens. Now, it did qualify under my criteria. It was listed as horror on the sites that I use to categorize these films, but I think this movie is more sci-fi than horror. I'd say it's majority sci-fi with some horror moments. That doesn't make the xenomorphs any less scary, like when the xenomorph comes out of the water behind Newt. That's straight out of a scary movie. The debate about which movie is better, Alien or Aliens, has been ongoing for a very long time, back and forth. And I honestly, on any given day, don't know which movie I like better. I did a ranking of them all a year or two ago, and it was tough for me to pick what movie was going to go in the number one slot. It's a little bit easier for me when I'm ranking the best horror movies of all time, because I think that Alien is one of the best horror movies of all time. Aliens is still a great movie, but I can't put it up in the S tier with Alien because I just don't think it's as good of a movie in the horror genre. So it goes in the A tier with the original Alien in the S tier.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
And now we come to our last film on the list. It's one of the highest grossing horror films of all time adjusted for inflation. And again, it's one of those that a lot of people would say, well, wait a minute, that's not a horror movie. But when you think about it, and again, we kind of end how we started with Jaws. When you think about the effect of a horror movie, what is its intention? The intention is to scare you. And Psycho from 1960 by Alfred Hitchcock is one of the movies that has scared more people since it came out than almost any other movie. Scared of taking a shower, scared of that old house on the hill. It is a creepy film, and I think that it does qualify as a horror film. Although, yes, it is a bit slower. It's a bit more of a drama. The wind-up is longer.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
I think it counts as a proto-slasher film, and one of the all-time great jump scares is in this movie when the detective is coming up the stairs and Mother comes around the corner and slashes him in the face. Anthony Perkins puts in an all-time performance as Norman Bates.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
Janet Leigh is great. I think it's got one of the greatest swerves in movie history as far as the plot and what you might expect from it. And it ends with a big scream scene and a skeleton turning around in a chair. It may not, again, be horror at first glance, but I still think that it qualifies, and I think it's one of the best movies ever made. And so, For our final film, I am putting Psycho up there as an S-tier horror film, and if you don't think that it's horror, then look at me with a straight face and say you never thought of this movie when you were taking a shower at home alone. And there we have it. That's my tier list for the biggest horror movies of all time at the box office. I'm sure you agree, or probably even more so disagree with some of my choices. Let me know down in the comments below, and let me know what you think about this whole tier list thing, because I like doing these ranking videos, and I hope this maybe kind of shook it up a little bit, made it a bit more interesting. But most of all, thank you for hanging around and watching this video. I hope maybe I got you to add a couple movies that you had forgotten about or hadn't heard of to your Halloween movie list before it's too late. I hope everybody has a great Halloween. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.